I've worked through multiple emergencies, bushfires, other floods. I've never seen anything like what's happened. Major bridges taken out, huge landslips, just the road network, particularly up in the hinterlands, making it so that people have absolutely no way of getting in or out.
Some believe it's also exposed an inadequate emergency response by authorities during the height of the disaster, when it was hard to communicate with little phone and internet coverage.
I would say if it wasn't for spontaneous volunteers, many would have died, many would have been left unaddressed, many would be very sick.
Ella Ganinen and a group of volunteers banded together to provide an emergency response of their own. One key element
Our Father
was
who art in heaven,
rescues,
hallowed
which
be thy name.
included
Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen.
The live proceedings for today.
Honourable members, I respectfully acknowledge that we are sitting today on the land of Aboriginal people and pay my respects to elders past and present. I thank them as first Australians for their careful custodianship of the land over countless generations. We're very fortunate in this country to have two of the world's oldest continuing living cultures in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples whose lands, winds and waters we all now share. Honourable members, I have to report that I have received from Her Excellency the Governor a letter in respect to the assent to a bill. The contents of the letter will be incorporated in the record of proceedings. I table the letter for the information of members. Are there any matters of privilege? Honourable members, on the 2nd of March 2021, I tabled a ruling relating to a complaint by the member for Burnett alleging that the member for Keppel deliberately misled the House on the 20th of November 2021. I ruled that the matter did not warrant the further attention of the House via the Ethics Committee. I now refer to the matter so that if any member wishes to exercise their rights in respect to this matter under standing orders, they should do so immediately. Honourable members, management of order in the House is the collective responsibility of all members. In this House, the responsibility of holding the chair is the collective work of myself, Deputy Speaker, and our panel of temporary speakers. Standing Order 16 gives the Deputy Speaker and the temporary speakers the same powers of the Chair as the Speaker. Consequently, the Deputy Speaker and the temporary speakers must be given the same respect to the Chair as myself at all times that they hold the Chair. I acknowledge that some temporary speakers are learning on the job constantly. Therefore, mistakes can and will be made. Members should understand that when mistakes occur, I shall ensure the appropriate guidance is provided to temporary speakers. Members on the floor and whoever holds this chair both have a role in ensuring order in the House, and I ask that all members remember this when participating in its proceedings. Honourable members, I wish to advise members that we will be visited in the gallery this morning by students and teachers from Maruka State School in the electorate of Toohey, Mater Day Primary School, Toowoomba in the electorate of Toowoomba North, and Mount Sampson State School in the electorate of Pine Rivers. Are there any appointments to be announced? I call the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, I advise the House that the member for Kawana was elected yesterday as Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Following...
Order! Order! Members to my right, I was surprised to hear the cheer coming from this side. Thank you, members. The House will come to order. Leader of the Opposition, please continue.
It follows the resignation of the member for Toowoomba South from that position. I place on record my appreciation for the contribution and support of the member for Toowoomba South as Deputy Leader since the 2020 election, and advise that he remains Shadow Treasurer and Shadow Minister for Investment and Trade. The Deputy Leader will also be Shadow Minister for State Development, Infrastructure and Planning, Shadow Minister for Olympic and Paralympic Infrastructure and Jobs, and Shadow Minister for Industrial Relations. The member for Maroochydore has been appointed as Shadow Minister for Finance and Better Regulation, as well as Shadow Minister for Integrity in Government. Further changes include the appointment of the member for Glasshouse as Manager of Opposition Business, the appointment of the member for Toowoomba North as Party Room Chair and Shadow Cabinet Secretary, the appointment of the member for Theodore as Opposition Whip, and the appointment of the member for Currumbin as Deputy Opposition Whip. Mr Speaker, I table a list of the Shadow Ministry.
Will the clerk read the list of petitions lodged?
The following paper petition, sponsored by the clerk, is lodged for presentation. 234 petitioners requesting the House to block the imminent logging of Deerwar State Forest, Lot AP 22457. The following honourable members have lodged e-petitions which are now closed and presented. Mrs Freckington from 723 petitioners requesting the House to consider the provision of a persistent pain chronic pain clinic in the South Burnett. Mr Boothman from 659 petitioners requesting the House to make legislative changes to stop developers selling off the plan to deliberately delay progression of the development to enact sunset clauses for financial gain. Mr Purdy from 230 petitioners requesting the House to install pedestrian lights at the intersection of David Low Way and Petrie Creek Road, Diddillaba. The following lodged e-petitions sponsored by the clerk are now closed and presented. 55,865 petitioners requesting the House to provide the people of Queensland with reasons why COVID-19 vaccination of children should not cease immediately. 1,872 petitioners requesting the House to ensure the provision of information as to what treatment protocols are being actively administered or made available to all Queenslanders infected by COVID and its variants. 4,379 petitioners requesting the House to note the people of Queensland abhor discrimination and have the right to make their own health decisions without reprisal and/or discrimination. 1,112 petitioners requesting the House to call on the Sunshine Coast Regional Council in consultation with the community to reconsider existing plans for the Caloundra Transport Corridor. 4,419 petitioners requesting the House to legislate to allow people to seek legal remedy for adverse reactions from vaccines. 1,762 petitioners requesting the House to abolish the discriminatory requirement for annual medical checks for Queenslanders aged 75 or older in order for them to be able to continue to drive on our roads. 10,120 petitioners requesting the House to establish a commission of inquiry with terms of reference to investigate allegations of integrity and the failure of independent action.
Notifications and tablings. I call the clerk.
I inform the House of the tabling of certain papers in accordance with the notification and tabling of papers document emailed to members.
Are there any ministerial papers? Are there any ministerial notices of motion? Are there any ministerial statements? I call the Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, once again our state has faced a monumental natural disaster. Tuesday, the 22nd of the 2nd, 2022 will be the date we'll never forget. That night, heavy rain began falling between Gympie and the Sunshine Coast. A train was derailed, 7 schools were closed. The following day I stood in this place and warned that there was what was to come, had the potential to be a significant rainfall event for South East Queensland, and there was an increased risk of dangerous and life-threatening flash flooding over the coming days. Mr Speaker, no one could imagine what happened next. In those early stages, forecasters feared a month's worth of rain. What we got was 2/3 of our annual rainfall in just a matter of days. No one who saw it will forget it. Torrential, monsoonal, unrelenting rain. Ordinarily, nature reserves her fury for a single location, but not this time. It was as if a river dropped from the sky across the entire southeast. A total of 22 local council areas and 7 cities were impacted. In Gympie, I met business owners whose walls record the handwritten markers of floods dating back more than a century. This one reached higher. The waters rose around Noosa and the Sunshine Coast, Ipswich, the Lockyer Valley, Maryborough, Toowoomba, and of course in the streets in the city, the suburbs of Brisbane, Logan, Moreton Bay and the Gold Coast. Mr Speaker, it happened with terrifying speed. The swift water teams performed 657 rescues. I met Paul Edwards, who was saved from his home, and his wife was saved from his home in Ashgrove. Paul, his wife and 3 neighbours suddenly found their houses surrounded by raging torrents like rapids in the middle of a river. A swift water team pulled them through windows and off their roofs. They owe their lives to those teams. And there were countless more rescues performed by neighbours and passers-by. Mr Speaker, Queensland has more heroes than it can count. There are no words to express the respect, admiration and gratitude that we owe to those who risk their own lives helping others in their most desperate hours of need. State emergency volunteers, and I stress these are volunteers, answered 13,685 calls for help. One of them, former nurse Meryl Dray, lost her life on her way to help others. I extend to Meryl's friends, family and members of the Lowood SES my profound sympathies and those of this House. Mr Speaker, 12 others also lost their lives and one person is still missing. Tragically, many of them were trying to reach the safety of home when their cars were swept from flooded roads. Our hearts go out to their families and to loved ones. Mr Speaker, numbers often tell a story words cannot. In this event, a total of 16,703 damage assessments have been completed on flooded properties. 4 homes at this stage completely destroyed. 1,810 houses and commercial buildings were severely damaged. 2,554 with moderate damage and 3,514 with minor damage. 87 schools were damaged. 80,233 insurance claims have lodged to the value of $1.2 billion to date. In 6 days, 792.8 millimetres of rain fell in Brisbane, 137 millimetres more than in 1974. This is the highest 6-day figure ever recorded. 56 locations received more than 1,000 millimetres. Mount Glorious received 1.8 metres of rain. Wivenhoe Dam did the job it was built for, holding back an amount of water equivalent to 4 Sydney harbours. I hate to think of the impact that dam did not exist. Mr Speaker, that is what happened to us. But it is what we have done to respond that shows the true strength of Queensland. Mr Speaker, these past 2 weeks I've travelled north, south, east and west. I've talked to people whose every worldly possession was piled up on their footpath, destroyed. Stacey and Kim in Scarborough, Talia and Arito and Logan. Farmer Troy Kolashevsky lost his crop in the Lockyer Valley and some of their machinery. Karen and her friends lost the entire stock at Gympie's Toy Library. I met Lois and her neighbour Dan. Dan had come all the way from Collingwood Park to help out in Goodna. Dan, the Mill Street man who found himself the accidental foreman directing the flood cleanup. Despite her losses, Lois isn't leaving the home and the neighbours that she loves. She's part of the community. Mr Speaker, I'm proud to say that when the people of this state needed their government was there to help them. I want to pay tribute to our outstanding public servants who perform this vital work. The Department of Communities and Housing established 23 community recovery hubs directly in the neighbourhoods worst affected by the floods. Here they help people access emergency hardship assistance grants of $180 per person or $900 for a family of 5 to cover flood, medication, clothing and essential items. There was also the Essential Services Hardship Assistance of $150 per person and $750 per family. At last count, they processed 61,702 applications. They've made 25,570 payments worth more than $10.6 million, benefiting more than 58,804 people in this state. 1,167 people have been helped into emergency housing. And under joint arrangements with the federal government, more than 620 small businesses and not-for-profit organisations have paid $50,000 each in recovery grants. 70 primary producers have assessed grants worth $75,000 each to date. Small businesses also are able to access extraordinary disaster assistance loans of up to $250,000. 19 local councils will receive $1 million each to assist with clean-up costs. $32 million has been announced to help sporting and recreation clubs back on their feet. Queensland Rail has repaired already 2,000 metres of track at 26 locations. Already, Maritime Safety Queensland has salvaged more than 2,000 tonnes of debris from Brisbane River, including 41 vessels. Despite frequent and savage storms, 180,000 homes which had lost power were reconnected by the 8th of March. And, Mr Speaker, the $6 million flood levy, jointly funded by my government and the Fraser Coast Council, have helped contribute to saving the city's CBD from a repeat of floods it suffered in January. But perhaps the greatest example of Queensland resilience can be found where it is most commonly on display. On the 28th of January, the playing field of Suncorp was underwater. 11 days later, it hosted the NRL curtain raiser and the Broncos won. Mr Speaker, the job of recovering and rebuilding is ongoing. That is why I've appointed Major General Jake Elwood as our flood recovery coordinator. Major General Elwood led recovery efforts after the summer bushfire disaster. He has been with me to see for myself the size of the job ahead. He's also been with the Deputy Premier and the Treasurer to listen to the stories of those people impacted. And as with all natural disasters, our response to this one will be reviewed by the Inspector General of Emergency Management. The terms of reference include dam management and emergency alerts. Mr Speaker, and I table the terms of reference for the House. It is expected it will also include public submissions. Mr Speaker, I welcome this review. It is how we continually improve so that we can serve and protect the people of this state better. It is why Queensland has one of the world's best disaster management systems in the world. We have a permanent state disaster coordinator appointed. Our mayors chair local disaster management groups, which are the backbone of our emergency response. Finally, on behalf of the people of Queensland, I want to thank the 1,183 men and women of the Australian Defence Force who came to our aid. And I note the arrival of the US Navy, and I extend my thanks and gratitude. 100 sailors from the USS Frank Cable are assisting with our recovery. Thank you to all those who have donated to our Queensland Floods Appeal. It so far has raised more than $15 million to be distributed by the Salvos, Red Cross, Give It, Lifeline and St Vincent de Paul. And, Mr Speaker, another $25 million was raised in last weekend's Australian Unites telethon to be shared between New South Wales and Queensland. Mr Speaker, members will also have the opportunity to add to that tally when the Parliament hosts our own flood appeal on the Speaker's Green on March 30th. And I thank the Speaker and the Leader of the Opposition for also participating in this. I urge members to get their tickets early. Mr Speaker, when the worst happens in Queensland, it brings out our best. When the history of this flood is written, it will not only be the scale of the disaster we remember, it will be how the spirit our communities rose to meet it. One act of nature was tempered by thousands of acts of kindness and generosity that makes Queensland what it is. Long after the floodwaters are gone, that is what will be remembered, who Queenslanders are and what we stand for. Strong, defiant and always together. Mr Speaker, creating jobs and filling jobs are a responsibility my government takes seriously. I'm proud of our achievements. In January, Queensland led the nation on job creation. Unemployment is now at a 13-year low, just 4.4%. Queensland has the highest number of SEEK job vacancies on record. Since we came to office, there have been 376,800 more jobs. And modelling by Jobs Queensland forecasts another 280,000 new jobs by the middle of 2025. So that's more than 650,000 over a decade. The dignity of work where the times are good and in times of trouble. What we have now, of course, as we recover and rebuild from the latest natural disaster to come our way, is the need for workers to fill our jobs. That was one of the key points of our Workforce Summit last week, organised so well by our Minister for Employment. As I told the Summit, creating jobs and growing the economy brings new challenges. Developing skills for growth over the short term, and then as the world transitions from COVID, creating high-value, secure jobs to sustain economic growth over the long term. But there's also the here and now, finding the workers we need right now for flood rebuilding. We've shown how to do it before. Our very successful Work in Paradise campaign from the tourism industry that I know the Minister will talk about later this week. That's why I've announced another really strong and aggressive campaign, this time to attract trade workers to Queensland. We have a big job ahead of us after the floods. Insurance claims are already more than $1 billion. We have more than enough work to go around. So if you're a tradie living in another state, we want you to come to Queensland. But not from New South Wales, because we know they also need to rebuild at this time. But tradies from elsewhere, we want you to fly, drive or even run to paradise.
I call the Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Since the House last sat, South East Queensland, Wide Bay and Fraser Coast have experienced catastrophic flooding that has now swept down the east coast of Australia. It hit us first and it hit us hard. Tragically, 13 Queenslanders lost their lives. Thousands of families lost their homes. They're in emergency accommodation now or staying with family or friends. The floods also damaged businesses, farms, schools and sporting facilities from Maryborough south to the Gold Coast and west to Toowoomba. In many areas, the devastation was worse than the 2011 floods 11 years ago. Through all the rain and mud and tears, the Queensland spirit has shone through. I want to pay tribute to the disaster and emergency services who worked around the clock to keep Queenslanders safe. Our police, AMBOs, our fireys and their swiftwater rescue teams, energy workers and road workers who kept us safe during the floods and worked so hard to get the power back on and the roads open again afterwards. Especially our volunteer state emergency service, including Meryl Dray, who lost her own life serving the Queensland community. And I want to thank the dam managers. They held back 4 Sydney Harbours worth of water from smashing its way through the city. As the skies cleared, we moved rapidly in to clean up and recovery, something Queensland is very experienced at. We have, after all, done it more than 90 times since 2011. We appointed Major General Jake Elwood to lead the disaster recovery. I only met the Major General a week ago, but I've been impressed with his genuine empathy and his quick problem solving. I know he is determined not to work from an office. He wants to spend every day in the field visiting a flood-affected community. He spent the weekend in Goodna, Bundamba, the Gold Coast and Ashgrove after visiting Gympie with me on Friday. We opened 23 community recovery hubs led by dynamos like Ariana from the Department of Communities, who I met in Gympie. She had barely slept, but the hub there was buzzing with staff and volunteers helping hundreds of people with whatever they needed. The Palaszczuk government secured an initial $558.5 million funding package to provide support to communities in need. In addition, we injected $1 million into each of the 19 affected councils to assist with urgent clean-up works, and $24 million of recovery funds have been advanced to the 14 most affected councils. Queensland's focus this past week has been to ensure the financial support is getting where it is most needed. People, families, small businesses and primary producers, and also the not-for-profit organisations that are themselves supporting our communities. Over the past week, personal hardship grants have been made available for more suburbs across the affected areas. The timeframes have also been extended, giving people more time to apply. 620 small businesses and 70 primary producers have applied for recovery grants. QFES and QRA have now completed damage assessments across 22 local government areas, and the data confirms the extent of the damage. Nearly 16,500 assessments undertaken of homes and buildings, nearly half have some level of impact, with 1,811 assessed as having severe levels of damage or totally destroyed, 2,548 with moderate damage and 3,500 with minor levels of damage. These floods came on top of an already intense summer disaster season, with 5 prior natural disaster events already flooding much of Queensland since November last year. While the recovery has started, there is a long way to go. Queensland has the world's first standing disaster recovery authority in the Queensland Reconstruction Authority. The Palaszczuk government will ensure flood-affected communities don't just build back, but build back better, like we did in 2011, 2015, 2017 and now 2022.
I call the Treasurer and Minister for Trade and Investment.
Speaker, the impact of the weather event that struck the southeast just over 2 weeks ago is still being felt by many Queenslanders. Each day they are making heart-wrenching decisions about which possessions they can salvage and which they must throw out. Seldom has there been a natural disaster in our state that has inflicted so much damage on Queensland in such a short period of time. Preliminary estimates from Queensland Treasury are that the impact of that 3-day event on the state budget this financial year will be between $2 and $2.5 billion. This includes money for disaster response and recovery and support measures. It is anticipated that around $1 billion of that will be required to restore public infrastructure, including roads, rail systems and bridges. In addition, Queensland Treasury analysis suggests the impact on the economy is around 0.25 percentage point of gross state product. That equates to around $1 billion in lost economic activity. Speaker, it is important to recognise that these are early estimates that could very well rise. Mercifully, despite the carnage and cost, the impact on our state's economy will be less than other historical weather events, such as the 2011 floods and severe tropical cyclone Yasi and severe tropical cyclone Debbie. This is because north of the Wide Bay there was virtually no impact on our mining and agriculture sectors. This is no comfort, of course, Speaker, to Queenslanders cleaning mud and silt from their homes and businesses. But our government will do what Queensland governments always do after natural disasters. We will help individuals, families and communities get back on their feet. We will help businesses get back on their feet. We will help Queensland get back on its feet. And we will ensure that we can restore the strength of the Queensland economy as soon as possible, so we can continue our path to economic recovery together. Speaker, on that point, and for the benefit of those opposite when it comes to matters of parliamentary strategy, later this week I will be updating the House on the importance of continuing to grow Queensland's international trade and investment relationships, even in times of natural disaster.
Speaker. Order. Order. Members to my left. I call the Minister for Police and Corrective Services and Minister for Fire and Emergency Services.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, the recent extreme weather event that engulfed south-east Queensland impacted lives and property. Many are grieving the loss of loved ones, including our own SES volunteers who lost one of their own. Lowood SES volunteer Meryl Dray lost her life as she was going to the aid of others trapped by floodwaters. I send my deep condolences to Meryl's family, friends and colleagues. Meryl's selfless giving of her time to her community as an SES volunteer will always be remembered and always be honoured. Speaker, during the emergency, the State Emergency Service responded to more than 13,000 calls for help, help that was sorely needed and greatly appreciated by those who were impacted by the devastation. Speaker, while sadly there were lives lost to the floods, there were also many lives saved during that devastating event. The Fire and Rescue Service, with its professional emergency service staff, performed more than 600 swiftwater rescues. Speaker, I'm advised that one of the more remarkable rescues happened at Nunda. Swiftwater Rescue Team leader Adam Martin and his crew responded when a car was washed into floodwaters at Nunda. It was dark, Speaker. Adam and his crew waded through chest-deep floodwaters searching. After nearly half an hour, they'd had no luck. Time was ticking by, minute by critical minute. Then a resident on a nearby veranda called out and pointed in the direction of something he had spotted. Adam and his team responded immediately, and as improbable as it might sound, they spotted a light shining through the water. The light was being cast by a mobile phone inside a car completely submerged under floodwaters. Adam and his team dived under the water, smashed open the car's window and discovered a young woman and young man inside the submerged vehicle. Every second counted and there were only precious moments of oxygen left in the car. Adam and his team pulled the couple out, got them to the surface and then managed to get them through 400 metres of floodwaters to safety. It had been a very close call. The young woman had used her mobile phone, the one the Swiftwater Rescue Team saw shining under the surface, to send her last goodbyes to her loved ones. Fortunately, Speaker, they weren't her last goodbyes. Speaker, thanks to the tenacity, the spirit, the professionalism and dedication of Adam and his Swiftwater Rescue Team, 2 people are still alive today. Yeah. During the southeast time of emergency, the Rural Fire Service was also there to help, supporting emergency responses, running makeshift evacuation centres and, importantly, helping with the enormous clean-up effort, including conducting washouts of flood-impacted properties. Speaker, the Queensland Police Service was also incredibly busy, with officers on the ground throughout the emergency, assisting with swiftwater rescues, evacuating residents, searching for missing persons, conducting marine and waterway rescues and patrols, and establishing and monitoring road closures. Speaker, our collective thanks to all of these courageous Queenslanders who have served in our state's police and emergency services and those working in disaster management, the Defence Forces and other essential frontline roles for what they have done during the recent emergency. Speaker, as the Premier announced, whenever there is a major natural disaster, we will call upon the Inspector-General Emergency Management to conduct a review. The Inspector-General will examine the response to the floods and look for any lessons that can be learned or improvements that can be made. The review will examine the timing and effectiveness of emergency alerts and will assess cooperation between all agencies at a local, state and national level. The review team will also assess other issues like measures taken to manage dam operations and to protect life and property. The Inspector-General of Emergency Management will be inviting submissions from the public, and I understand he also intends to host some public forums. Speaker, in conclusion, to all of our essential, frontline and emergency services personnel, thank you for keeping Queenslanders safe.
And that's the live coverage coming from the Queensland Parliament House, and we will stop the proceedings there. It's 10 o'clock. We'll go on to our news segment today. And of course, the first news we begin with is that incident about Manmeet Alisher. And right now, some verdict has been reached. Let's take a look at that report.
To our Sikh community, Manmeet Alisher was a shining star, actor, social worker, singer, smiling bus driver, killed in the front seat of a crowded council bus by a man with psychosis. Anthony O'Donoghue had been cared for by Queensland Health for years and gradually, after improving, was cut free.
Many people drive buses, trains and Ubers and taxis. So it does not happen again.
O'Donoghue had a loving childhood, a sportsman who earned 2 degrees. By 2011, he had chronic delusions. He calmed down at night by fantasising about killing unionists. Eventually, his case manager and psychiatrist believed he was stable, cooperative, consistent. They discharged him without any support. O'Donoghue never believed he was mentally ill. He thought his medication was useless. He still had suicidal thoughts, and he wouldn't give consent for his file to be shared with a GP. Despite all of this, he was cut loose. Asked if resourcing was a relevant consideration, his psychiatrist replied, yes, it was at that point. O'Donoghue called the service just weeks after discharge. His former case manager called back once. 2 months later, Manmeet was dead. Now clients like O'Donoghue can only be freed with support of a GP and family. He's the first person in Queensland to be sentenced to at least a decade in a secure treatment centre. Erin Edwards, 7 News.
So he is in a secured centre, and there are a lot of uproars within the community to say that is just not enough or not fair treatment. And of course, him being allowed to be out in the public in the first place was not a very, very good decision there as well. Well, right now, the emergency works have begun with the recovery of the flood victims.
Robert Corrower has lived in Lismore for more than 20 years. He's never seen a flood like this one.
The water went up to there.
Like so many here, he's still coming to terms with losing everything.
I still haven't got anywhere to live. I'm just staying in a shed at the back of a friend's house.
And he wants urgent action on climate change.
These events be happening more often, and that not just here, us in Lismore, but right around Australia.
It's a sentiment shared by former emergency chiefs who've slammed the Commonwealth's response to the floods. They've accused the government of ignoring warnings.
So even when their professional agencies were briefing up to say that things need to be done about the possibility of catastrophic floods, as usual, the Morrison government sat on its hands.
This is where national security starts, right here at home. There'll be nothing left to defend in 30 years if we don't do something now.
But the agency in charge has defended the emergency rollout. It insists it can't take action until asked by the states.
The Commonwealth and Defence do not have legal jurisdiction to respond without being requested or tasked, and they operate in support of the requesting state. The state remains with the primacy.
All of our agencies, state, federal, local, are learning every single time. And it's important that we all just keep working together.
Back here in the impacted areas, the community is bypassing the arguments at the top and supporting each other on the ground, like this makeshift recovery centre.
This is a really great example of what can be achieved when there's no political agendas.
Helping to carry the load in a time of need. Nikari Thorpe, ABC.
And in a time of need, there should be no political agenda and everyone should come forward and assist and help each other. Right now, let's take a look at the situation in Ukraine before we go to our daily India report.
The city of Mariupol in Ukraine's southeast has been the scene of the worst humanitarian crisis in that war, and that's saying a lot. Hundreds of thousands of residents have been trapped by heavy bombardment without food, water and power. We've seen horrific images emerge from that city of bodies in the streets, mass graves, and entire residential areas flattened. And officials say as many as 2,500 residents have been killed in heavy bombing so far. But today, a small piece of good news. After 10 days of failed attempts to evacuate civilians and failed ceasefires, a convoy of at least 160 cars made it out of Mariupol today. There was no shelling along that evacuation route, according to local officials, and they've so far made it through a number of Russian checkpoints to the city of Zaporizhia further south, but they're not there yet. However, Ukraine says that a humanitarian aid convoy, a convoy of desperately needed aid, is being blocked by Russia from entering that city. So that's not all going to plan. And today's developments come during a fourth round of talks between Ukraine and Russia. They've been paused without any announcement of progress. Today's developments suggest perhaps a small amount of progress has been made, but we just don't know with no announcement yet. And Ukraine is in mourning for 35 soldiers and new recruits who were killed at that military base in Ukraine's west today, just around 20 kilometres from Poland's border. That attack sent shockwaves through NATO countries, both because it was so close to Poland's border and Poland being a NATO state, and any misfire could have gone into Poland itself. And of course that was a facility where NATO troops had for many years been training Ukrainian soldiers. We attended a funeral today of one of those killed, a 22-year-old lieutenant named Volodymyr Dutsenko. He was training soldiers at that base, and he died when his living facilities collapsed. It was a sombre scene, his mother wailing and young soldiers just like him carrying his coffin. We spoke with a military chaplain named Roman Mentuch. He was a close friend of the dead soldier, and here's a little of what he had to say.
He was a really positive person. He told a lot of jokes. He was a real helpful person. A real disgusting and terrible attack from Russia, and we really want to share this message to all the Europe, to all the world, that it isn't just a war of Ukraine. It is a war of all civilization, war against evil. We are here to want to defend our country, and they come in here to kill. Putin coming to our homes, to our families, and bring just pain, just death of women, of children, of our defenders.
New details have emerged about that attack. US officials have said that more than 24 cruise missiles were fired at that base from inside Russia. Now that's very significant given Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has been calling for a no-fly zone to be enforced by NATO states to stop bombings in his country. But US officials say that if that attack, as they say, was fired from Russia, that wouldn't stop attacks in Ukraine. Now, I also want to bring you another development that's just come in. Fox News has announced that their correspondent Benjamin Hall was injured while news gathering outside of the capital Kyiv. I just want to read the statement to you here. They say, we have a minimal level of details right now, but Ben is hospitalised and our teams on the ground are working to gather additional information as the situation quickly unfolds. Now, this comes just a day after an American journalist, Ben Reno, was shot and killed when Russian forces opened fire on his vehicle just outside of Kyiv in the town of Irpin, near the capital, and of course after several other attacks on journalists and media in this short war so far.
Okay, Mr. Dunlop, yes, of course it is very, very scary being out there, and I take my hats off to you, all of you, being on the site and reporting from such an extremely dangerous situation out there. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now it's time to go to our daily India report.
Welcome to Daily India Report that brings you glimpses of the changing India. In our first story, after the 15th round of talk on the issue of the line of actual control, India and China agreed to maintain stability on ground. Both countries also agreed to maintain dialogue via military and diplomatic channels to reach a mutually acceptable resolution of the remaining issues at the earliest. India and China agreed to maintain the security and stability along the line of actual control in the western sector. This was the outcome of the 15th round China-India Corps commander level talks. The meeting was held at the Chushul-Moldo border meeting point on the Indian side on 11th March 2022. The two countries carried forward their discussions from the previous round held on January 12, 2022 for the resolution of the relevant issues along the LAC in the western sector. The Indian Army spokesperson said both sides had a detailed exchange of views in this regard, in keeping with the guidance provided by the leaders to work for the resolution of the remaining issues at the earliest. Both the countries reaffirmed that such a resolution would help restore peace and tranquility along the LAC in the western sector and facilitate progress in bilateral relations. The two sides also agreed to maintain the security and stability on the ground in the western sector in the interim and agreed to maintain dialogue via military and diplomatic channels to reach a mutually acceptable resolution of the remaining issues at the earliest. India and China have been holding talks on the line of actual control in the eastern Ladakh area to resolve the standoff. The talks held till now have resulted in the resolution of the north and south bank of Pangong So, Galwan and Gogra hot spring areas. After the meeting, both sides will now focus on a resolution of balance in fiction areas. Recent statements by both sides to find a mutually acceptable solution have been encouraging and positive in nature. India is moving quickly to set up an alternative payments system to maintain its trade with Russia. A potential bank has been identified to undertake transactions related to prioritizing edible oil and fertilizer imports from Russia, as well as payments owed to India. Western countries have placed financial sanctions against Russia after it invaded Ukraine. India had to scramble to set up an alternative payments system by identifying a potential bank to keep its trade relations with Russia intact. A top interministerial committee examining the issue has said the government should prioritize edible oil and fertilizer imports from Russia and the payments it owes to India. The interministerial panel is examining the potential impact of the Western sanctions against Russia on India. Economic Affairs Secretary Ajay Seth is heading the committee that includes members of different ministries including Consumer Affairs, Fertilizers, Commerce, External Affairs and Petroleum. Western sanctions against Russia are impacting the global economy. Currencies of many nations, including India, have been devalued. Rising oil prices, supply chain issues, and increasing inflation have impacted the economy. The government believes that the supply shortage of edible oil and fertilizers could give rise to food inflation and disrupt the farm sector in the country. With regard to the bank partner, talks are on with the State Bank of India and UCO Bank. With the shrinking oil market for Russia amid sanctions, India may also be in a better position to negotiate the prices of Russian oil. The government may take similar payment measures as were taken during the sanctioning of Iran by the US. At that time, the Kolkata-based UCO Bank had anchored a so-called Vostro account. Once finalized, Russia will deposit rubles in it, while India will deposit rupees. Then the national exchange rate will be determined, pegging it to an international currency. Though India does not buy anything outside the country with the rupee, and it's the same with Russia's ruble. The alternative payment system will help set up a bilateral system. After setting up a payment bank, Russia will buy goods from India with rupees and India will use the rubles it will get from Russia to pay for imports. International carrier Singapore Airlines has resumed the Airbus A380 Super Jumbo aircraft services to India from March 14th. International carrier Singapore Airlines resumed the Airbus A380 Super Jumbo aircraft services to India from March 14th. The services will start between Mumbai and Singapore, and later the A380 aircraft will be used on the Delhi route as well, according to the airline. Singapore Airlines was the first airline worldwide to fly the A380 Super Jumbo in October 2007. In late 2017, following an extensive 4-year development program, the airline launched a multi-million-dollar cabin product upgrade for its A380 aircraft. The new cabin product made its debut in India on September 1, 2019. C. Yen Chen, General Manager of Singapore Airlines, said that the expansion of SIA Group's VTL network is also perfectly timed with the relaunch of the airline's A380 services to Mumbai from March 14th and to Delhi in the coming months. Singapore Airlines' new A380s are fitted with 471 seats in 4 classes, with 6 in suites, 78 in business class, 44 in premium economy class and 343 in economy class. In March 2022, under the vaccinated travel lane, eligible travelers are allowed into Singapore without quarantine requirement. Earlier, the service launched on November 29, 2021, was applicable only for flights from Delhi, Mumbai and Chennai. Now, more travelers from India who are fully vaccinated may use the VTL for quarantine-free travel, Singapore Tourism Board said. Traveling to Singapore from India for fully vaccinated travelers has become easier, with some prerequisites before departure, including a valid visa, a vaccinated travel pass, a stay of 7 consecutive days in India or a VTL country, and a mandatory RT-PCR test. Separately, Singapore Airlines Group March 11th announced that it will convert all its flights from India to Singapore into vaccinated travel lane services from March 16th. Currently, it operates flights from 8 points in India to Singapore, while existing daily VTL flights will continue to operate from Chennai, Delhi and Mumbai. SIA's all other India flights that arrive in Singapore from March 16 will progressively operate as VTL services, the company said. These are flights from Ahmedabad, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Kochi and Kolkata. SIA Group said its low-cost subsidiary Scoot will also convert its non-VTL services from Amritsar, Coimbatore, Trivandrum, Tiruchirappalli and Vishakhapatnam into VTL. Flamboyant Indian wicketkeeper batter Rishabh Pant broke the legendary Kapil Dev's 40-year-old record of fastest Test 50. Rishabh made the record on the second day of the day-night match against Sri Lanka. Indian wicketkeeper batter Rishabh Pant on March 13th broke the legendary Kapil Dev's 40-year-old record of fastest Test 50 by an Indian on the second day of the day-night match against Sri Lanka. The dashing left-hander cruised to his 50 in 28 balls in the 42nd over of Indian's second innings when he hit a Praveen Jaya Vikrama delivery through the extra cover boundary. India's first World Cup winning skipper Kapil Dev had cracked a 30-ball half-century against Pakistan in the Karachi Test in 1982. Pant also set a world record for notching up the fastest 50 by a wicketkeeper batter in Tests, bettering the efforts of Australia's Ian Smith and former India captain MS Dhoni. Both scored 34-ball 50. Pant, however, could not make it big and got out at the same score and over, giving Jaya Vikrama a return catch in the final delivery. Shardul Thakur is the third in the list of fastest Test 50 by an Indian with his 31-ball half-century in the Oval Test against England last year. Former Indian opener Virendra Sehwag has scored a 32-ball 50 against England in Chennai in 2008. The makers of RRR shared a promo video of its celebration anthem featuring Alia Bhatt, Ram Charan and Junior NTR. The release of the much-awaited period action drama RRR starring Alia Bhatt, Ram Charan and Junior NTR is just around the corner, and the makers are leaving no stone unturned to brace audiences for its premiere. On March 11th, the creators of the film shared a promo video of the celebration anthem of RRR. Needless to say, it is all things energetic and fun. The promo clip begins with a tagline that reads, "Celebrating the magic of Indian cinema." Soon after, enter Ram Charan and Junior NTR as they hoist a flag with Vande Mataram imprinted on it. With peppy beats, the lead trio Alia Bhatt, Ram Charan and Junior NTR display their exceptional dancing prowess as the energetic song plays in the background. While Bhatt adorns a typical South Indian get-up, Charan and Junior NTR look dapper in traditional kurta sets. Just as the title suggests, the main cast of the film appears to be celebrating to the fullest in the teaser of the song. Just a couple of days ago, the makers raised anticipation about the song, stating, "Brace yourselves for the joyful #RRR Celebration Anthem." Now the teaser of the track has become nothing less than a visual treat for fans. RRR Celebration Anthem is being released in multiple languages, including Hindi, on 14th March 2022. Apart from Alia Bhatt, Ram Charan and Junior NTR, the movie also stars Ajay Devgan, Shreya Saran, Ray Stevenson, Ellison Doody and Samuthira Kani in pivotal roles. Rise, Roar, Revolt is a fictional tale tracing the lives of two freedom fighters, namely Alluri Sitaram Raju and Kumaram Bhim, from the early 20th century. Helmed by S.S. Rajamouli, the upcoming film is produced by DVV Dannaya under the banner of DVV Entertainments. The period action drama is all set to hit the big screens on 25th March 2022. That's all for this bulletin of Daily India Report.
And thank you very much, Himanshu, for that. For our conclusion, we'll head back to the Parliament House.
And to see people that have come from around different parts of Queensland to help people in need. And I remember, talking to Lois and telling me how, she wants to rebuild her life and she wants to stay there in that community that she loves so dear. But also too, Mr Speaker, to see the community and the support. The local Westpac branch had set up a tent there to help with the recovery. Yeah. And for any moment, people need to reflect too, cleaning up a person's life on their front doorstep, on the footpath, it does not take minutes, it takes days. Yeah. And to see the army coming in, helping, the community helping, I think from memory to the member for Jordan, I think it was one of your local Springfield basketball teams. They were there setting up, providing water and providing food. There were people the local foreman there who was appointed himself Dan, came there and was assisting trucks going in and out. To see the community in one street, it's what's happening right across the southeast, Mr Speaker. And, it gives me heart that we have a really strong community in this state, and I think I went through that in my ministerial statement. To see people just pick themselves up and say to me, we're going to get on with our lives, this disaster has happened, but we're going to rebuild. And to see then all of the agencies come on board to help out so quickly, the community recovery centres set up so quickly, the money out the door so quickly. all of the emergency personnel responses happening so quickly, and then to see the generosity of Queenslanders give to the flood appeal, I want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah. I call the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Question to the Premier. The CE of the Public Service Commission is accused of levelling a misogynistic slur against Queensland's first female Integrity Commissioner, is under investigation by the Crime and Corruption Commission after he oversaw the raid on the Integrity Commissioner and wiping of a laptop, and is accused of releasing a misleading statement as part of an attack on the Integrity Commissioner. Despite the mounting evidence, can the Premier explain why she is protecting the bully instead of the Office of the Integrity Commissioner?
Order. Order. Member for McConnell.
Mr Speaker, can I say to Member Kwana, I reject his allegations, Mr Speaker. There are a number of these issues that have ongoing inquiries that are happening, Mr Speaker. Well, Mr Speaker, no, Mr Speaker.
Sorry, Premier. Deputy Leader of the Opposition, you've asked the question. I'd like to hear the answer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Have the call, Premier.
So, Mr Speaker, we want to await the outcome of the CCC, I understand has matters before it. But, Mr Speaker, also too, let me say this, and I said it clearly in my opening answer to the Leader of the Opposition. I actually said it at the press conference yesterday. Where there are workplace issues, and it happens in any workplace, where there are... Mr Speaker,
Order.
There are avenues available for a mediator to come in and to...
Sorry, pause the clock. Members to my left, the Premier is being responsive to the question asked. You may not like the answer, but the Premier is responding. Premier, you have the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I expect there to be respect in the workplace, Mr Speaker. Yeah. And I expect a high standard, Mr Speaker. Yeah.
Member for Everton.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Order. Members to my right. Order. Member for Nango, I'd call the House to order. You're warned under standing orders. Member for Everton, you'll cease your interjections.
We leave the Parliament sitting there, and of course it's been wonderful having your company today. Right now, let's take a look at some of the functions and events happening right here in Brisbane. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's about all we have for you. I hope you have enjoyed this segment today, the extended segment with the Parliament sitting. So on the sitting days, we will begin with the Parliament sitting and continue on to the news and daily India report around 10 a.m. So it's been wonderful having your company, and don't forget that the functions and events that you are attending, please always make sure that you reconfirm the date and timing and the conditions of entry, which could be, varying from the degrees of health requirements that might be there. So, it is always good to check that one so that we are in compliance with the rules and regulations that are required. So once again, this has been a presentation of Australian Indian Radio in conjunction with Gentex Multimedia as the streaming partners. Until tomorrow, it's goodbye from me.